The morning sun rose slowly over Fort Braxton, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost too beautiful for a military base. The air was crisp and carried the smell of aviation fuel mixed with the fresh scent of morning dew on the grass. Soldiers in their uniforms moved across the grounds with purpose, their boots creating a rhythm against the concrete pathways. Helicopters sat in neat rows on the tarmac, their metal bodies gleaming under the growing sunlight. Among them stood the most fearsome of all military aircraft, the Apache attack helicopters, looking like mechanical predators waiting to be unleashed. General Marcus Hendricks stood at the edge of the runway with his hands clasped behind his back. He was a man of 62 years with silver hair cut short in military fashion and a face that showed the weight of 3 decades of service. His uniform was decorated with medals and ribbons that told stories of battles fought and victories won. He had commanded troops in desert storms and mountain conflicts. He had shaken hands with presidents and advised secretaries of defense. In the world of military aviation, his word was law, and everyone knew it. Today was supposed to be a routine inspection day. The general had flown in from Washington specifically to review the readiness of the helicopter units stationed at Fort Braxton. His reputation for being harsh and demanding preceded him everywhere he went. Young soldiers whispered warnings to each other when they heard he was coming. Senior officers made sure every piece of equipment was polished and every document was in perfect order. Nobody wanted to be on the receiving end of General Hendricks's famous temper. Standing beside him was Colonel James Patterson, the base commander, a nervous man in his early 50s who kept checking his watch and wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool morning air. He had been preparing for this inspection for weeks, and still he felt unprepared. The general had a way of finding problems that nobody else could see, and today Colonel Patterson was certain something would go wrong. The inspection began at 7 in the morning sharp. General Hendricks walked through the hangars with a critical eye, stopping occasionally to question a mechanic or examine a piece of equipment. He ran his finger along surfaces checking for dust. He asked technical questions that made even experienced pilots pause and think. He reviewed maintenance logs with the intensity of a detective searching for clues at a crime scene. Every mistake he found was noted in a small leather book he carried in his pocket. By noon, the general had found 17 issues that needed immediate attention. A hydraulic line that was showing wear. A set of records that had been filed incorrectly. A young private who had not properly secured his toolbox. Each discovery was met with a stern lecture and a disappointed shake of the head. Colonel Patterson followed behind, making notes and apologizing repeatedly, his face growing redder with each passing hour. It was during the afternoon portion of the inspection that she first appeared. Maya Chen was walking across the tarmac with a stack of folders in her arms, heading toward the administrative building. She was 34 years old with black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. She wore civilian clothes, a simple blue blouse and dark pants, which made her stand out among all the uniforms. General Hendricks noticed her immediately. Not because she was particularly striking in appearance, though she was pretty in an understated way. He noticed her because civilians were rare on this part of the base, and because she was walking with the kind of confidence that suggested she belonged here, even though her clothes said otherwise. He turned to Colonel Patterson with a raised eyebrow. "Who is that woman?" he asked, his voice carrying the tone of someone who expected immediate answers. Colonel Patterson looked up from his notes and followed the general's gaze. "That is Dr. Maya Chen, sir. She works in our research and development section. She is one of our civilian consultants." The general made a sound that might have been disapproval. "Civilians walking freely around my helicopters," he muttered. "What exactly does this doctor consult about?" Colonel Patterson cleared his throat nervously. "She is actually quite valuable to us, sir. She works on flight systems and cockpit interface designs. She has helped improve pilot reaction times by nearly 12% through her software modifications." General Hendricks was not impressed. His experience had taught him that civilians rarely understood what military operations truly required. They sat in their comfortable offices writing reports and making recommendations while soldiers did the real work of defending the nation. He had seen too many bright young academics come in with their theories and their degrees, only to produce results that looked good on paper but failed in the chaos of actual combat. "Call her over here," the general said suddenly. "I want to meet this consultant who walks around my base like she owns it." Colonel Patterson looked uncertain but waved to one of his aides, who jogged over to intercept Maya Chen. A moment later, she was walking toward them, her folders still clutched against her chest. Her face showed curiosity but not fear, which the general found interesting. Most people looked terrified when summoned to meet him unexpectedly. "Dr. Chen," Colonel Patterson said with forced cheerfulness, "may I introduce General Marcus Hendricks? He is here from the Pentagon for our quarterly inspection." Maya shifted her folders to one arm and extended her hand. "It is an honor to meet you, General. I have read several of your papers on rotary wing tactical deployment. Your work on the use of attack helicopters in urban environments was particularly insightful." The general shook her hand briefly, surprised that she knew his academic work. Most people only knew him for his combat record and his temper. "So you are the one who has been tinkering with my helicopters," he said, his tone challenging. Maya did not flinch at his attitude. "I prefer to think of it as enhancing them, sir. The modifications I have developed have reduced pilot workload by 20% while increasing target acquisition speed. The feedback from pilots has been overwhelmingly positive." The general looked at her with narrowed eyes. "Feedback from pilots," he repeated. "Tell me, Dr. Chen, have you ever actually flown a helicopter? Or do you just sit in a laboratory somewhere imagining what pilots need?" There was a sharp edge to his question, designed to put her in her place. It was a technique he had used many times before on civilians who thought they understood military operations. Usually, they would become defensive or apologetic. Usually, they would admit their limitations and defer to his superior experience. Maya Chen did neither. "I have logged over 300 hours in flight simulators, General," she replied calmly. "I have also spent considerable time in observer positions during training exercises. While I am not a certified military pilot, I believe I have a solid understanding of the challenges pilots face." The general laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "Simulators," he said, shaking his head. "My dear doctor, simulators are toys compared to the real thing. You can spend 1,000 hours in a simulator and still have no idea what it feels like to be in an actual cockpit with enemy fire coming at you from all directions. You academics are all the same. You think your computers and your calculations can replace real-world experience." Several officers who had gathered nearby shifted uncomfortably. They had seen the general dress down people before, but there was something particularly pointed about the way he was going after this woman. Colonel Patterson looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. Maya remained remarkably composed. "I certainly respect the difference between simulation and reality, General. That is precisely why I work so closely with actual pilots. Their input is essential to everything I do. My role is not to replace their experience but to support it with better technology." The general seemed to consider her words for a moment. Then, a thought crossed his mind that brought a cruel smile to his lips. He turned and pointed toward the nearest Apache helicopter, its dark body sitting on the tarmac like a crouching beast. "You know what, Doctor," he said, "let me make you an offer. That Apache over there is fully operational. Why don't you climb in and show me what you have learned in your 300 hours of simulator time? Give me a demonstration of these enhanced systems you are so proud of." The challenge hung in the air like a held breath. Everyone knew what the general was doing. He was calling her bluff, expecting her to back down and admit that all her theoretical knowledge meant nothing when faced with an actual aircraft. It was a test designed to humiliate her, to prove his point about civilians meddling in military affairs. Colonel Patterson stepped forward, his face pale. "General, sir, I do not think that is appropriate. Dr. Chen is not qualified to fly military aircraft. There are regulations about who can operate the Apaches." The general waved his hand dismissively. "Relax, Colonel. I am not asking her to take off and fly a combat mission. I just want to see how well she handles herself in the cockpit. She claims to understand pilot needs so well. Let her prove it. He turned back to Maya with a smirk. Unless, of course, she is not as confident in her abilities as she seems to be. Maya looked at the Apache, then back at the general. Her expression had not changed, but something flickered in her eyes. It might have been anger, or it might have been calculation. Those around her could not tell. I would not want to violate any regulations, General, she said carefully. Consider the regulations suspended for the next hour, the general replied. I am giving you personal authorization. Consider it an opportunity to show me what you are really made of. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. Unless you would rather admit that your simulator experience means nothing and your enhancements are just theoretical nonsense. For a long moment, Maya said nothing. She looked at the Apache, then at the general's smug face, then at the uncomfortable officers standing around them. She thought about all the times she had been dismissed because she was not a real pilot. She thought about the years she had spent developing systems that made pilots safer and more effective, only to have people like this general treat her like she was playing pretend. Then, she made a decision that would change everything. Very well, General, she said quietly. I accept your challenge. The general's smile widened. He had not expected her to accept. He had expected her to make excuses, to back down, to prove his point about civilians not belonging in the military world. Now he would watch her make a fool of herself in the cockpit, unable to even start the engines, and everyone would see that Dr. Maya Chen was just another academic with more confidence than ability. What he did not know, what nobody on that tarmac knew, was that Maya Chen was not who she appeared to be. The secret she had carried for years, the past she had hidden from everyone at Fort Braxton, was about to be revealed. And, when it was, nothing would ever be the same. As she walked toward the Apache, Maya felt her heart beating faster in her chest. Not from fear, but from anticipation. For years she had lived a quiet life as a civilian consultant, burying the person she used to be under layers of academic credentials and research projects. For years she had watched pilots come and go, never revealing that she understood their world far better than any of them realized. The general had wanted to humiliate her. Instead, he had just given her permission to do something she had not done in a very long time. He had given her permission to fly. The ground crew stared as she approached the Apache. One of them, a young sergeant named Williams, stepped forward hesitantly. Dr. Chen, are you sure about this? These birds are not like what you see in the movies. Maya smiled at him, a genuine smile that softened her features. I appreciate your concern, Sergeant. But I will be fine. She climbed the small ladder to the cockpit with a familiarity that surprised everyone watching. The Apache AH-64 was a complicated machine, a two-seat tandem cockpit helicopter designed for death and destruction. The front seat was for the gunner, who operated the weapons systems. The rear seat was for the pilot, who controlled flight operations. Most people who were not trained pilots needed help just figuring out how to strap in properly. Maya did not need any help. She settled into the pilot's seat like she was coming home after a long journey. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced ease, checking instruments and switches without having to think about where they were. It was muscle memory, the kind that comes from thousands of hours of repetition, not 300 hours in a simulator. On the ground, General Hendricks watched with his arms crossed over his chest. He was still smiling, but there was a slight crease in his forehead. Something about the way she had climbed into that cockpit bothered him. Something about the way she moved, confident and certain, did not match his expectations. Colonel Patterson moved to stand beside him. General, perhaps we should stop this. If something goes wrong, there will be questions. Reports to file. The general shook his head. Let her embarrass herself. It will be a good lesson for everyone here about the difference between theory and practice. In the cockpit, Maya was going through the pre-flight checklist, but not the abbreviated version a civilian would know from a manual. She was doing the full checklist, the one pilots memorized during their training, checking each system in exactly the right order. She activated the auxiliary power unit and listened to the familiar whine of the turbines beginning to spin up. Her headset crackled to life with a voice from the control tower. Apache 27, we are showing you powering up, but we do not have any authorized flight operations scheduled for this aircraft. Please confirm your status." Maya keyed her microphone. "Tower, this is Dr. Maya Chen in Apache 27. I have been given personal authorization by General Hendricks for a demonstration. Please confirm with the General if you need verification." There was a pause, then the tower came back. "Understood, 27. We are confirming with ground personnel. Please hold your position." Maya could imagine the confusion in the tower right now. A civilian consultant sitting in the pilot's seat of an Apache, claiming to have authorization from a visiting general. It was the kind of situation that would normally result in alarm bells and security responses. But she knew the general would confirm. His pride would not let him back down now. Sure enough, after a minute the tower came back. 27, authorization confirmed. You are cleared for ground operations only. Do not attempt takeoff, repeat, do not attempt takeoff without further clearance. Copy that, tower. Ground operations only. Maya smiled to herself. Ground operations meant she could start the engines and taxi the aircraft, but not lift off. That was fine. She had not planned to go any further anyway. Not yet. She advanced the throttles and felt the massive engines behind her roar to life. The rotor blades above began to spin, slowly at first, then faster and faster until they became a blur. The Apache vibrated around her, a living machine eager to fly. It had been so long since she had felt this, and she had forgotten how much she missed it. On the ground, the observers backed away as the rotor wash kicked up dust and debris. General Hendricks did not move. He stood watching, his eyes fixed on the helicopter, his expression slowly changing from smug confidence to something more uncertain. Colonel Patterson had to shout to be heard over the noise. "Sir, I really think we should stop this." But the general did not answer. He was watching Maya in the cockpit, watching how smoothly she had brought the engines online, watching how naturally she handled the controls. He had seen enough pilots start up Apaches to know what it looked like when someone knew what they were doing. And what he was seeing now did not match his expectations at all. Maya brought the Apache to a hover 2 feet off the ground. Not technically a takeoff, just a hover, testing the controls and the response of the aircraft. She made small adjustments, tilting the helicopter slightly left, then right, then forward, then back. Each movement was precise and controlled, the mark of someone with extensive flight experience. Through the cockpit glass, she could see the general staring up at her. His arms were no longer crossed. His face had lost its smug expression. He looked like a man who was beginning to realize he had made a serious mistake. Maya keyed her microphone. Tower, Apache 27 requesting clearance for a brief demonstration flight around the base perimeter. Duration approximately 10 minutes. The tower hesitated. 27, we show you as a civilian consultant. We cannot authorize actual flight operations without proper pilot credentials. Maya took a deep breath. Then, she said something that would be repeated in whispered conversations for years to come. Tower, please check your database for Captain Maya Chen, U.S. Army, Aviation Branch, formerly assigned to the 101st Airborne Division, Night Stalkers, qualified on AH-64 Apache, service number ending 4792. I believe you will find my credentials are in order. There was complete silence on the radio for a long moment. Then, chaos erupted. On the ground, General Hendricks felt like the world had shifted beneath his feet. Night Stalkers. The 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the most elite helicopter unit in the entire military. The pilots who flew the most dangerous missions, who operated in total darkness, who had participated in operations that would never appear in any newspaper. And Captain Maya Chen had been one of them. The tower came back, and the controller's voice was shaky. Captain Chen, we have confirmed your credentials. We had you listed as medical discharge. Your file was supposed to be archived. It was, Maya replied, her voice flat. But, I never stopped being qualified. Now, am I cleared for that demonstration flight or not? Another pause. Then, you are cleared, 27. Airspace is yours. General Hendricks watched in stunned silence as the Apache rose smoothly into the air, no longer hovering but, truly flying. Maya took the helicopter through a series of maneuvers that would have been impressive from any pilot, but, which were breathtaking coming from someone he had dismissed as a mere civilian consultant. She flew low and fast over the runway, then pulled up in a steep climb before banking sharply and coming back around. It was a demonstration of skill and control that left no doubt. Whatever Maya Chen had become in her civilian life, she had once been an exceptional pilot. And she was proving it now for everyone to see. Colonel Patterson was staring at the sky with his mouth open. "Night Stalkers," he whispered. "I had no idea. Her personnel file just said she was a former military contractor. It did not say anything about active service." The general did not respond. He was thinking about all the things he had said to her, all the condescending remarks about simulators and academics. He had challenged her to prove herself, never imagining that she had more combat flight hours than half the pilots on his base. He had tried to humiliate her, and, instead, he had humiliated himself. Up in the Apache, Maya felt something she had not felt in years. Freedom. Joy. The pure exhilaration of flight. She had given this up after her medical discharge, had convinced herself that she was happy with her quiet life as a researcher. But, sitting in this cockpit, feeling the helicopter respond to her every command, she realized how much she had been lying to herself. She had walked away from flying because she had to. Because the injury she had sustained in her last mission had left her with limitations that the Army considered disqualifying. Because the Military Medical Board had decided she could no longer meet the physical requirements for combat aviation. But, they had never said she had forgotten how to fly. She brought the Apache down gently, settling it back onto the tarmac as softly as a leaf falling onto still water. The engines wound down, the rotor blades slowed, and, finally, there was silence. Maya sat in the cockpit for a moment, collecting herself. She knew that when she climbed out, everything would be different. Her carefully constructed civilian identity would be gone. Questions would be asked that she had spent years avoiding. The past she had tried to leave behind would come rushing back. But, as she opened the cockpit and climbed down, she found that she did not care. The general had pushed her into this corner, had forced her to reveal herself. And, now he would have to deal with the consequences. General Hendricks was walking toward her, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Around them, soldiers and officers had gathered, drawn by the unexpected spectacle. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. "Captain Chen," the general said when he reached her. His voice was different now, lacking all its earlier arrogance. "I owe you an apology." Maya met his eyes steadily. "Yes, sir." "You do." The general opened his mouth to say something else, but Maya cut him off. "But, you also owe an explanation to everyone else who has been treated the way you treated me. Every civilian who has been dismissed. Every officer who has been belittled. Every person who did not have a secret past to prove their worth." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I am not the one you should be apologizing to, General. I can handle people like you. I have been handling them my whole life. But, what about the people who cannot? What about the brilliant engineers and designers and researchers who walked away from their work because someone made them feel like they did not belong?" The general had no response. For perhaps the first time in his long career, Marcus Hendricks was speechless. Maya handed him the flight helmet she had taken from the cockpit. "I will have my resignation letter on Colonel Patterson's desk by tomorrow morning," she said. "I think my time here is done. But, I hope you will think about what happened today, General. And, I hope you will remember it the next time you want to put someone in their place." She walked away without looking back, leaving the general standing on the tarmac with a helmet in his hands and 100 eyes watching him. The inspection was forgotten. The reports and the findings and the 17 issues that needed attention were all suddenly meaningless. Something much more significant had happened on this runway today. And everyone who had witnessed it knew that there would be consequences. They just did not know yet how far those consequences would reach. But they were about to find out. The video appeared on social media 3 days after the incident on the tarmac. Someone had recorded the entire confrontation with their phone, starting from the moment General Hendricks first challenged Maya Chen to fly the Apache. The footage showed everything clearly. The general's mocking tone when he made his offer. The surprise on everyone's faces when Maya accepted. And then, the stunning revelation of her true identity as a decorated Night Stalker pilot who had been hiding in plain sight. Within hours, the video had been viewed by hundreds of thousands of people. Within days, that number had grown into the millions. News networks picked up the story and ran it on their evening broadcasts. Military bloggers and defense journalists wrote long articles analyzing what had happened and what it meant. Social media exploded with commentary, most of it harshly critical of General Hendricks. The general himself was back in Washington when he first learned about the video. He was sitting in his office at the Pentagon, going through paperwork, when his aide rushed in with a tablet computer showing the footage. General Hendricks watched it once with a growing sense of dread, then watched it again with the full realization of what this meant for his career. Every word he had spoken was captured clearly on the recording. Every dismissive remark, every condescending question, every moment of smug confidence that had preceded his humiliation. And, worst of all, Maya's final speech, her challenge to him about all the other people he had treated the same way, was now being quoted everywhere as an example of speaking truth to power. The phone calls started coming almost immediately. His superiors wanted explanations. His subordinates wanted guidance. Reporters wanted comments. And, throughout it all, the general sat at his desk feeling something he had not felt in decades. Fear. General Hendricks had built his reputation on being tough and uncompromising. He had never apologized for his demanding style because it produced results. His units had some of the best readiness ratings in the military. His officers went on to lead with the same intensity he had taught them. He believed that excellence required pressure, that strength came from being pushed to your limits. But the video showed something different. It showed a powerful man using his position to belittle someone he considered beneath him. It showed casual cruelty disguised as a test of competence. And the public did not see the general's career of achievement and service. They saw a bully who had finally been confronted by someone he could not push around. Meanwhile, Maya Chen had returned to her small apartment off base and was trying to process everything that had happened. She had meant to submit her resignation and disappear quietly, returning to the anonymous civilian life she had built for herself. But the video had made that impossible. Now everyone knew who she was, and the media was desperate to tell her story. Her phone rang constantly with calls from numbers she did not recognize. Reporters knocked on her door at all hours. Interview requests piled up in her email inbox. Everyone wanted to talk to the woman who had stood up to a general and won. But Maya did not feel like she had won anything. She felt exposed and vulnerable, like a wound that had been healed over was suddenly torn open again. The life she had carefully constructed since leaving the military was falling apart, and she did not know how to put it back together. On the 4th day after the incident, there was a knock on her door that was different from the others. When she looked through the peephole, she saw a woman in her 60s with gray hair and kind eyes, wearing a simple dress instead of a reporter's outfit or a military uniform. Maya hesitated, then opened the door. "Captain Chen," the woman said, and there was something familiar about her voice, something that made Maya's heart skip. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I think we need to talk about my husband." Sarah Mitchell. The name echoed in Maya's mind as she stepped back to let the woman enter. Mitchell. She knew that name. She knew it from the worst night of her life, the night that had ended her military career and haunted her dreams ever since. "You are his wife," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sergeant Mitchell's wife." Sarah nodded, moving into the small apartment and looking around at the sparse furnishings. Yes. David was my husband for 23 years before he died. Before that night in the mountains. Maya felt like she could not breathe. The memories came flooding back, as clear and terrible as the day they had happened. The mission in Afghanistan, deep in enemy territory. The firefight that had erupted from nowhere. And Sergeant David Mitchell, her crew chief, bleeding out in the back of her helicopter while she fought to get them home through a sky full of tracer fire. Mrs. Mitchell, Maya started to say, but Sarah held up her hand. Please, call me Sarah. And, before you say anything, I want you to know why I am here. She sat down on Maya's small couch, folding her hands in her lap. I have been watching the news coverage of what happened at Fort Braxton. I have been reading about you, about your service record, about everything you accomplished as a Night Stalker pilot. And, I realized that I had made a terrible mistake. Maya sat down across from her, confused. What mistake? Sarah's eyes glistened with unshed tears. For years, I blamed you for David's death. When the army told me what happened, all I heard was that you were the pilot. That you were in command. That somehow, you failed to save him. I was so consumed with grief that I needed someone to blame, and you were the easiest target. Maya had known about the blame. She had received letters from the family in the months after the incident, letters full of anger and accusation. They had stopped eventually, but, by then, the damage was done. The guilt that Maya had already felt was multiplied by the knowledge that Mitchell's family held her responsible. I do not blame you for that, Maya said quietly. If I were in your position, I would have felt the same way. I was the pilot. I was supposed to bring everyone home safely. And, I failed. Sarah shook her head firmly. No. That is what I came here to tell you. I finally got access to the full mission report, the classified version. I know now what really happened that night. I know that you flew into a storm of enemy fire to try to save a team that was surrounded. I know that when your helicopter was hit and started to fail, you refused to turn back because there were still soldiers on the ground who needed extraction. I know that David was killed by a lucky shot that came through the airframe, and that there was nothing you could have done to prevent it. She paused, taking a shaky breath. And, I know that after David died, after you were wounded yourself, you still managed to fly that crippled helicopter back to base and save the lives of everyone else on board. You did not fail, Maya. You did something heroic. Maya felt tears streaming down her own face now. She had spent years carrying the weight of that night, believing that she should have done something different, something better. The medical discharge had felt like a punishment she deserved. The quiet life as a civilian consultant had felt like penance for her failure. The injuries I sustained, Maya said, that is why I was discharged. My left arm has reduced range of motion, and my reaction times are not what they used to be. The medical board decided I was no longer fit for combat aviation. Sarah reached across and took Maya's hand. But, you are still an incredible pilot. I saw the video from Fort Braxton. The way you handled that Apache was amazing. And, more than that, I saw the way you stood up to that general. David would have been so proud of you. The mention of her crew chief brought fresh tears. Sergeant Mitchell was the best crew chief I ever worked with, Maya said. He could keep a helicopter flying with nothing but duct tape and determination. That night, he saved my life when he pushed me out of the line of fire. The bullet that hit him was meant for me. I know, Sarah said softly. I know everything now. And I needed to come here and tell you that I am sorry for the blame I put on you. I am sorry for the letters my family sent. And I am sorry that it took me so long to learn the truth. The two women sat together in Maya's small apartment, sharing tears and memories and the beginnings of healing. Sarah told stories about David that Maya had never heard, stories about the young man he had been before the military, about his dreams and his sense of humor and the way he had proposed to her on a fishing boat in the middle of a lake. Maya shared her own memories of serving with him, of the missions they had flown together, of the trust that had existed between pilot and crew chief. By the time Sarah left, something had shifted in Maya's heart. The guilt that had been her constant companion for years was not gone entirely, but it was lighter now. She had received something she never expected to receive. Forgiveness from the family of the man she had not been able to save. The next morning, Maya made a decision. Instead of hiding from the media attention and trying to rebuild her anonymous life, she would step forward and use her sudden platform for something meaningful. She called one of the reporters who had been trying to reach her and agreed to an interview. The interview aired on a major network news program 3 days later. Maya sat across from the journalist in a television studio, looking calm and composed despite the cameras and lights surrounding her. She talked about her military service, about the challenges female pilots faced in combat aviation, about the night in Afghanistan that had changed everything. But, mostly, she talked about General Hendricks. "I do not want to destroy the general's career," she said when the journalist asked about her intentions. "That is not why I am doing this interview. The general is a complicated man who has done good things and bad things, just like all of us. But I want to use this moment to start a conversation about how we treat people in positions of power and how we respond when that power is abused." The journalist leaned forward. "What do you mean by abuse of power?" Maya considered her words carefully. "When General Hendricks challenged me to fly that Apache, he was not genuinely interested in testing my abilities. He wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone because I was a civilian who dared to have opinions about military equipment. He assumed that I could not possibly know what I was talking about because I was not one of them. That assumption is a form of abuse, even if it seems small compared to other kinds." She continued. "I happen to have a hidden background that allowed me to prove him wrong. But what about all the people who do not have that kind of proof? What about the civilian experts who get dismissed because they are not wearing uniforms? What about the junior officers who get belittled because they have not been in combat? What about the women who get questioned because their appearance does not match someone's idea of what a soldier should look like?" The interview generated even more attention than the original video. Maya's words resonated with people across the country who had experienced similar treatment in their own workplaces and lives. Letters and emails poured in from soldiers and civilians alike, sharing their stories of being underestimated and dismissed. General Hendricks watched the interview from his office at the Pentagon, sitting alone in the dark with only the glow of the television screen for company. He had been avoiding the media, refusing all interview requests, hoping that the story would die down if he stayed quiet. But Maya's interview made that strategy impossible. She was not calling for his resignation. She was not demanding an investigation. She was doing something far more devastating. She was making him think about all the things he had done over 30 years of service, all the times he had used his authority to put someone in their place, all the junior officers and enlisted soldiers and civilian employees who had walked away from encounters with him feeling small and worthless. The worst part was that she was right. General Hendricks knew it in his bones, even if his pride fought against admitting it. He had become exactly the kind of leader he had despised when he was young, a man who confused intimidation with leadership and cruelty with strength. The following week, the Pentagon announced an investigation into the incident at Fort Braxton. It was presented as routine, just a review of how authorization had been given for a civilian to fly military aircraft. But everyone knew it was really about General Hendricks and whether his behavior constituted conduct unbecoming an officer. The investigation turned up other complaints that had been buried over the years. Junior officers who had reported being verbally abused by the general. Civilian employees who had quit rather than continue working under his command. Even some senior officers who had witnessed incidents but had been afraid to speak up because of the general's connections and reputation. Maya was called to testify before the investigating committee. She answered their questions honestly and completely, describing exactly what had happened on the tarmac without embellishment or exaggeration. When they asked whether she thought the general should be punished, she gave an answer that surprised everyone. "I think General Hendricks should have the opportunity to learn from this experience," she said. "Punishment alone does not change behavior. If the general genuinely understands what he did wrong and commits to treating people differently, then I believe he can still contribute positively to the military." But, if he refuses to acknowledge his mistakes, if he continues to believe that his way of leading is acceptable, then he should not be in a position of authority over other people. The committee was impressed by her measured response. They had expected anger and demands for justice. Instead, they got a thoughtful perspective on leadership and accountability that made them reconsider their own approaches. General Hendricks was given the opportunity to respond to the investigation's preliminary findings. He could have fought back, could have marshaled his connections and his reputation to defend himself. He had done it before with other complaints, using his influence to make problems disappear. But something had changed in him. The weeks of watching the fallout from his confrontation with Maya Chen had forced him to look in a mirror he had been avoiding for years. He saw an old man who had let power corrupt his judgment, who had forgotten that leadership was about serving others rather than dominating them. On a cold morning in November, General Marcus Hendricks walked into the Pentagon for what he knew would be the last time. He was carrying a single envelope containing his letter of resignation. He had written it himself, without input from lawyers or advisors, taking full responsibility for his actions and acknowledging that his behavior had failed to meet the standards expected of a military officer. The Secretary of Defense received him in a private office. They had known each other for decades, had served together in their younger years, had built careers alongside each other. Now they sat on opposite sides of a desk, one man ending his career while the other witnessed it. "You do not have to do this, Marcus," the secretary said. "The investigation could go either way. You have supporters who are willing to fight for you." General Hendricks shook his head slowly. "That is exactly the problem, Tom. I have spent my entire career building a network of supporters who would protect me from the consequences of my actions. And that protection allowed me to behave in ways that I never should have." He placed the envelope on the desk. "I am not resigning because someone is forcing me to. I am resigning because I finally understand that I should." The secretary opened the envelope and read the letter. It was straightforward and honest, admitting to failures of leadership and judgment without making excuses. When he finished reading, he looked up at his old friend with something like respect in his eyes. "This is a good letter, Marcus. It will be entered into your official record." General Hendricks stood and offered his hand. "I hope that Captain Chen sees it. I would like her to know that her words made a difference." The announcement of General Hendricks's resignation made national news. Most coverage focused on the dramatic confrontation that had led to this moment, replaying the video of Maya flying the Apache and quoting from her various interviews. But some journalists noticed something unusual in the general's resignation letter, a section that had been made public at his request. In his letter, General Hendricks wrote about Maya Chen not as an adversary who had defeated him, but as a teacher who had shown him truths about himself that he had been afraid to see. He wrote about the military's responsibility to nurture talent wherever it was found, regardless of whether the talent came in a uniform or civilian clothes. And he wrote about the importance of humility, of remembering that rank and experience did not make anyone automatically right. Maya read the letter on her phone while sitting in a coffee shop near Fort Braxton. She had returned to the base to collect her personal belongings and say goodbye to the colleagues who had become friends over her years there. The resignation news had reached her through a text message from Colonel Patterson, who had become something of an ally since the incident. She read the general's words twice, then set her phone down and stared out the window at the parking lot. Rain was falling in gentle sheets, blurring the outlines of the cars and buildings outside. She thought about everything that had happened since that morning on the tarmac, all the unintended consequences of accepting a challenge she should have refused. Her phone buzzed with another message. This one was from Sarah Mitchell, who had stayed in touch since their first meeting. Sarah had been following the news coverage and wanted to know how Maya was feeling. Maya typed back a response. "I do not know how I feel. Relieved maybe. And a little sad." The general was not a monster, just a man who lost his way. "I wish things had ended differently for him." Sarah replied quickly. "You did the right thing by speaking up. David would have said the same. Sometimes good people need to be confronted with their mistakes before they can change. The general had that chance because of you. Maya put her phone away and finished her coffee. The rain was letting up now, patches of blue appearing between the clouds. She had decisions to make about her own future. The publicity from this incident had opened doors that had been closed to her before. Job offers were coming in from aerospace companies and defense contractors. Several universities had expressed interest in having her teach. She even had an invitation to speak at a conference on women in aviation. But there was one possibility that she kept coming back to, one option that seemed both impossible and inevitable at the same time. The Army had contacted her through Colonel Patterson with an unusual offer. Given her demonstrated skills and the attention her story had received, they were willing to reconsider her medical discharge. There was a new program for pilots with certain physical limitations who could still contribute through training and evaluation roles. If she was interested, they would begin the paperwork immediately. Going back to the military seemed crazy after everything that had happened. The institution that had discharged her, that had taken away the flying career she loved, was now offering to give her a second chance. It felt like both an apology and a challenge. Maya thought about Sergeant Mitchell, about the crew chief who had sacrificed himself so that she could live. She thought about all the missions they had flown together, all the soldiers they had saved, all the moments of terror and triumph that had defined her years as a night stalker. And she thought about Sarah Mitchell's words, about David being proud of her for standing up to the general. She made her decision. 3 months later, Captain Maya Chen put on a military uniform for the first time in 5 years. It felt strange and familiar all at once, like slipping back into a skin she had shed long ago. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw not the civilian consultant who had been hiding from her past, but the pilot she had always been underneath. Her new assignment was at Fort Rucker, the Army's primary helicopter training base. She would be working with the next generation of pilots, sharing her experience and expertise while developing the flight systems she had always been passionate about. It was not the combat flying she had done before, but it was something perhaps even more important. She would be shaping the future of Army aviation, one student at a time. On her first day, she walked into a classroom full of young helicopter pilot candidates who had heard the stories about her. They looked at her with a mixture of awe and curiosity, this woman who had become famous for confronting a general and winning. She looked back at them and saw herself from 20 years ago, eager and talented and ready to prove herself. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying easily across the room. "My name is Captain Maya Chen. Some of you may know my story, and some of you may have heard exaggerated versions of it. But let me tell you what really matters. I am here to help you become the best pilots you can be. I am here to share everything I have learned about flying and about the responsibilities that come with it. And I am here to make sure that none of you ever make the same mistakes I have seen made by people in positions of authority." She paused, meeting the eyes of each student in turn. Being a pilot is not just about technical skill. It is about judgment and integrity and the courage to do what is right even when it is difficult. It is about treating everyone around you with respect, whether they wear a uniform or not. And it is about remembering that every single person on your crew and every single person you serve is trusting you with their lives. The students were silent, hanging on her every word. Maya smiled for the first time since entering the room. "Now, let us begin." The years following General Hendricks' resignation were quiet ones for him. He had moved from Washington to a small town in Virginia where nobody recognized his face from the news coverage. He bought an old farmhouse with a few acres of land and spent his days doing things he had never had time for during his military career. He learned to garden, growing tomatoes and peppers and herbs that he used in meals he taught himself to cook. He adopted a dog, a gentle Labrador mix from the local shelter who followed him everywhere. He read books he had always meant to read, classics of literature and philosophy that had gathered dust on his shelves while he was building his career. But, even in his quiet retirement, the memory of what had happened at Fort Braxton never left him. He thought about Maya Chen often, wondering what had become of her, whether she had found happiness after everything he had put her through. He thought about all the other people he had treated badly over the years, the ones who had never had the chance to confront him the way she had. And he thought about the man he used to be, the young lieutenant who had entered the military with such idealism, and wondered when exactly he had lost his way. General Hendricks had a grandson named Tyler, the son of his daughter Catherine, who visited him every few months. Tyler was 17 years old and seriously considering a military career. He reminded the general of himself at that age, full of confidence and ambition, believing that he could accomplish anything if he worked hard enough. During one of these visits, Tyler asked his grandfather a question that had been bothering him for years. "Grandpa," he said, sitting on the porch of the farmhouse while the Labrador dozed at their feet, "why did you really resign? The official story says you retired early, but I have seen the videos online. I know what happened with that pilot lady." General Hendricks was silent for a long moment. He had always known this conversation would come eventually. He had thought about what he would say, how he would explain his actions to the grandson he loved so much. "I resigned because I did something wrong, Tyler, and I needed to take responsibility for it." Tyler frowned. "But all you did was challenge her to fly a helicopter. That does not seem like such a big deal. And, besides, she showed off and made you look bad. If anyone should have been in trouble, it was her for embarrassing you in front of everyone." The general shook his head slowly. "That is how I thought about it at first. I told myself that I was the victim, that this woman had humiliated me on purpose to advance her own agenda. But, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I was wrong. I challenged her because I wanted to put her in her place. I assumed she was not a real pilot because she did not fit my image of what a pilot should be. And, when she proved me wrong, instead of admitting my mistake, I wanted to make excuses." He looked at his grandson with the serious eyes of a man who had learned hard lessons. "Tyler, I spent 30 years in the military, and, for most of that time, I believed that being strong meant never backing down, never admitting weakness, never letting anyone see that you might be wrong. I thought that was what leadership required. But, I was confusing strength with stubbornness and leadership with dominance." Tyler listened intently, his young face thoughtful. The general continued. "Real strength is being able to admit when you have made a mistake. Real leadership is lifting people up instead of tearing them down. Captain Shen taught me that, even though I was too proud to recognize it at the time. She had every right to be angry and bitter after what I did to her, but instead she used the moment to try to make things better for everyone. That is the kind of leader you should aspire to be, not the kind I was." Tyler was quiet for a while, processing what his grandfather had told him. Then, he asked, "Do you ever wish you could go back and do things differently?" "Every single day," the general replied. "I cannot change what I did, but I can learn from it. And I can make sure that you learn from it too. When you join the military, and I have no doubt that you will, remember that the people around you are human beings with their own stories and struggles. Do not make the mistake I made of treating people like obstacles to be overcome instead of partners to be respected." The conversation stayed with Tyler long after he returned home. He thought about it when he applied to West Point the following year, writing an essay about leadership and humility that drew heavily on his grandfather's experience. He thought about it when he was accepted into the academy, when he began his training, when he faced his own moments of challenge and doubt. And, years later, when Lieutenant Tyler Hendricks was assigned to his first command, he thought about it again. He remembered his grandfather's words about treating people with respect, about admitting mistakes, about what real leadership looked like. And, he made a silent promise to himself that he would be a different kind of leader than the one his grandfather had been. Meanwhile, Maya Chen's career at Fort Rucker was flourishing. She had been promoted to major and was now running the Advanced Helicopter Training Program, overseeing the development of the next generation of Army aviation pilots. Her teaching style was demanding but fair, pushing students to their limits while always treating them with the respect they deserved. She had also continued her research work, developing new flight systems and training protocols that were being adopted across the military. The enhancements she had created during her years as a civilian consultant had been refined and expanded, and they were now saving lives in combat zones around the world. Pilots who had trained under her system reported faster reaction times, better situational awareness, and improved survival rates in dangerous situations. But perhaps her most significant contribution was harder to measure. Maya had become an advocate for a different kind of military culture, one that valued expertise wherever it was found and treated all personnel with dignity. She spoke at conferences and wrote articles about the importance of inclusive leadership. She mentored young pilots and engineers who faced the same kinds of prejudices she had experienced. And she worked tirelessly to change policies that created barriers for qualified people based on factors that had nothing to do with their abilities. It was during this period that Maya received an unexpected invitation. The Army War College wanted her to give a lecture as part of their senior officer training program. The topic they suggested was leadership lessons from the Fort Braxton incident. Maya hesitated at first. She had made peace with what had happened, but she was not sure she wanted to relive it in front of an audience of colonels and generals. The men and women who attended the War College were the future leaders of the military. Some of them probably knew General Hendricks personally. Some of them might resent her for bringing down a respected officer. But, then, she thought about the opportunity this represented. These were exactly the people who needed to hear her message. If she could reach even a few of them, if she could plant seeds of change that would grow as they advanced in their careers, then, the entire experience might have been worth it. She accepted the invitation. The lecture hall at the Army War College was filled with senior officers in their dress uniforms when Maya walked to the podium. She looked out at the sea of eagles and stars on collars and epaulets, and, for a moment she felt like she was back on that tarmac at Fort Braxton, facing down a hostile crowd. But, this time she was not trying to prove herself. She was trying to teach. "Thank you for having me here today," she began. "I know that many of you are familiar with what happened between me and General Hendricks. Some of you may have opinions about it that are not entirely favorable to me. I want to start by saying that I understand those feelings. What happened was complicated, and there are no easy heroes or villains in the story." She paused, letting her words settle over the audience. General Hendricks was a decorated officer with a distinguished career. He served this country with honor for 3 decades. He made contributions to military strategy and operations that will be studied for years to come. Nothing that happened at Fort Braxton erases those achievements. She could see some of the tension leave the room. They had expected her to attack the general, to use this platform to further humiliate a man who was already defeated. Her balanced opening threw them off balance. But General Hendricks was also a flawed human being, Maya continued. He allowed his position and his accomplishments to blind him to his own biases. He treated people who were different from him as less worthy of respect. And, when confronted with his mistakes, he initially tried to defend himself rather than learn from them. She took a breath before delivering her key point. The truth is, General Hendricks was not unique. He was not a monster or an aberration. He was a product of a culture that rewards certain kinds of behavior and punishes others. A culture that equates strength with aggression and confidence with certainty. A culture that sometimes values image over substance and position over wisdom. The officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They knew she was talking about them, about the world they inhabited, about the temptations they faced every day. "I am not here to tell you that you are bad people," Maya said. "I am here to tell you that you are human people, with all the flaws and limitations that implies. And I am here to tell you that the higher you rise in the military, the more important it becomes to remember your humanity." She clicked to her first slide, which showed statistics about personnel retention and morale in units with different leadership styles. Research shows us clearly that leaders who treat their subordinates with respect and dignity get better results than those who rely on intimidation and fear. Units with positive command climates have higher readiness rates, lower turnover, and better combat performance. The old model of leadership through domination is not just morally problematic. It is tactically inferior. For the next hour, Maya walked them through case studies and data, showing the concrete benefits of inclusive leadership. She talked about the psychological research on performance under different kinds of pressure. She shared stories from her own experience, both as a subordinate who had faced disrespect and as a leader who had learned to do things differently. By the end of the lecture, the atmosphere in the room had changed completely. Officers who had come in skeptical were asking thoughtful questions about how to implement these principles in their own commands. Some had tears in their eyes as they shared their own experiences of being on the receiving end of abusive leadership. Several asked for copies of her slides and research so they could share them with their own subordinates. As Maya gathered her materials afterward, a colonel approached her with a business card. "Major Chen," he said, "I am on the Curriculum Development Committee here. I think what you presented today should be incorporated into our standard leadership training. Would you be willing to work with us on developing those materials?" Maya looked at the card in her hand. It felt like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. All the pain and struggle and exposure of the past years had led to this moment, to the opportunity to create lasting change in how military leaders were trained. "Yes," she said simply. "I would be honored." Over the following months, Maya worked with the War College to develop a new leadership module focused on inclusive command and the psychology of effective leadership. The module drew on her research, her personal experiences, and the stories of others who had shared their own encounters with destructive leadership styles. The curriculum was approved and implemented the following year. Every senior officer who passed through the War College would now be exposed to these ideas, challenged to examine their own leadership approaches, and given tools to do better. It was not a complete solution to all the problems in military culture, but it was a start. Maya received news of the curriculum's approval while she was visiting her mother in San Francisco. She had taken a few days of leave to reconnect with her family, something she had neglected during the years of building her post-discharge career. Her mother, a retired nurse named Linda Chen, had followed the whole saga with a mixture of pride and worry, supporting her daughter through the media storm and the career upheaval that followed. "You should be proud of yourself," Linda told her as they sat in the kitchen of the house where Maya had grown up. "You took something terrible and turned it into something good. That is what strong people do." Maya shook her head. "I am not sure I am that strong, Mom. Most of the time I was just trying to survive from one day to the next. The big picture stuff only became clear in hindsight." Her mother smiled knowingly. "That is how it always works, sweetheart. You do not get to see the whole pattern while you are in the middle of weaving it. You just have to trust that if you keep doing the right thing, it will all make sense eventually." They talked about other things then, about family and friends and the ordinary details of life that had nothing to do with generals or helicopters or military culture. Maya's sister came over with her children, and the house filled with the noise and laughter of a family gathering. For a few hours, Maya could just be herself, not the symbol she had become, not the pilot who challenged power, just a daughter and a sister and an aunt enjoying a warm afternoon with people she loved. But, even in those quiet moments, her mind kept drifting back to one unresolved piece of the story. She had never spoken directly to General Hendricks since the incident. She had read his resignation letter and heard about his retirement through news reports, but there had been no personal contact between them. And, as time passed, she found herself wanting to close the chapter properly. The opportunity came unexpectedly. Maya was attending a military aviation conference in Washington when she spotted a familiar figure across the crowded reception hall. General Hendricks, now just Marcus Hendricks, was standing near the refreshment table looking older and smaller than she remembered. He was not wearing a uniform anymore, just a simple gray suit that made him look like any other retired grandfather rather than the imposing military leader he had been. Their eyes met across the room, and, for a moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, Maya began walking toward him. She did not know what she would say or how he would react. She just knew that this conversation needed to happen. "General," she said when she reached him, then caught herself. "I mean, Mr. Hendricks. It has been a long time." Marcus Hendricks looked at her with eyes that held none of the arrogance she remembered from their first encounter. He looked tired and sad and somehow at peace all at once. "Major Chen," he replied, and she was surprised that he knew about her promotion. "Yes, it has been a long time. I was not sure if I would ever have the chance to speak with you again." "I was not sure I wanted you to," Maya admitted honestly. "For a while, I was angry. Not just at what you did, but at all the attention that came afterward. My private life became public property because of one moment on a runway.
Marcus nodded slowly. I understand.
And I am sorry for all of it. Not just for challenging you that day, but for everything that followed. You deserved better than to have your life turned upside down because of my arrogance. They moved to a quieter corner of the reception hall, away from the noise of the crowd. For the next hour, they talked in ways that would have been impossible in the immediate aftermath of the incident. Marcus told her about his life in retirement, about the grandchildren he was learning to connect with, about the slow process of examining a lifetime of choices and behaviors. Maya told him about her work at Fort Rucker and the War College, about the curriculum changes she had helped develop, about the pilots she was training who would go on to lead with different values than the ones she had encountered early in her career. You are doing good work, Marcus said when she finished.
Better work than I ever did, if I am being honest. I spent my career building things. You are spending yours changing people. That matters more in the long run.
Maya considered his words. I could not have done any of it without what happened between us.
That moment forced me out of hiding.
It made me confront parts of my past I had been avoiding. In a strange way, you gave me a gift that day, even though it did not feel like one at the time. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen on his face.
I suppose that is one way to look at it.
I prefer to think that you gave yourself the gift.
You could have walked away when I challenged you. You could have refused to engage.
Instead, you chose to stand up, and everything that followed came from that choice. They exchanged contact information before parting, promising to stay in touch. It was not friendship exactly, but it was something close to it. An understanding between two people who had been through a shared experience and emerged on the other side as different versions of themselves. Walking out of the conference center into the cool Washington evening, Maya felt something she had not felt in years. Closure. The circle that had begun on that runway at Fort Braxton was finally complete. The general had fallen, then risen again as a different man. She had been exposed, then rebuilt herself into something stronger. And, between them, they had started changes that were rippling outward into the military and beyond. Her phone buzzed with a text message from one of her students at Fort Rucker. A young pilot named Rodriguez who was struggling with a difficult training scenario was asking for advice. Maya smiled as she typed her response, reminding Rodriguez that failure was part of learning and that tomorrow was a new opportunity to try again.
This was what mattered now.
Not the past and its dramas, but the future and the people she could help shape it.
One student at a time, one lesson at a time, one conversation at a time.
The revolution in military leadership that she had accidentally started was continuing, and she was exactly where she needed to be to push it forward. The night was clear and filled with stars as she walked to her hotel. Somewhere overhead, helicopters were probably flying, carrying soldiers to missions she would never know about. Some of those pilots had trained on systems she had designed. Some of them had learned from instructors she had taught. The web of influence she had created spread further than she could trace, touching lives in ways she would never fully understand. And that, Maya realized, was exactly how meaningful change worked.
Not through grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, though those had their place.
But through the steady accumulation of small improvements, each one building on the ones that came before, until the whole landscape had shifted and no one could quite remember what it had looked like before. She thought about Sergeant Mitchell then, about the crew chief who had given his life so that she could live. She hoped he would be proud of what she had done with the years he had given her. She hoped that somewhere, somehow, he knew that his sacrifice had not been in vain. The stars above her seemed to twinkle in response, and Maya Chen, pilot and teacher and accidental revolutionary, walked on into the night. 5 years had passed since the confrontation at Fort Braxton when Marcus Hendricks received the phone call that would pull him back into the world he had left behind. His grandson Tyler was in trouble, and not the kind that could be fixed with a stern lecture or a disappointed look. Tyler was facing a court-martial. The details came in pieces through a staticky connection from Tyler's base in Germany.
There had been an incident during a training exercise.
Tyler, now a first lieutenant commanding a platoon of soldiers, had refused a direct order from his superior officer. The order in question had been to continue a live fire exercise despite deteriorating weather conditions that Tyler believed made the operation too dangerous. When his commanding officer had insisted, Tyler had stood his ground and ordered his men to stand down. The exercise had been called off shortly afterward when conditions worsened to the point that even the commanding officer had to acknowledge the danger. But, by then, the charge of insubordination had already been filed. A young officer who disobeyed orders, even for good reasons, was a threat to military discipline. And military discipline had to be maintained. Marcus sat in his farmhouse kitchen with the phone in his hand, feeling the weight of history pressing down on him. His grandson had done exactly what he had advised him to do all those years ago. Tyler had stood up for his men, had refused to put them in danger to satisfy the ego of a superior officer. And now he was going to pay the price for it. The irony was not lost on Marcus. Once, he had been the senior officer whose judgment was never questioned. Once, he had been the one who expected obedience regardless of circumstances. And now his own grandson was being punished for the kind of courage that Marcus had spent his final years trying to instill. He knew there was only one person who might be able to help. Maya Chen was in her office at Fort Rucker when her assistant told her that a Marcus Hendricks was on the line asking to speak with her urgently. She had kept in sporadic contact with the retired general over the years, exchanging occasional emails about military education and leadership development. But this was the first time he had called her directly, and the urgency in his voice when she picked up the phone told her immediately that something was wrong. She listened without interrupting as he explained the situation with Tyler. When he finished, there was a long pause before she spoke. "Why are you calling me, Marcus? I am a training officer, not a lawyer. What do you think I can do?" "I am not asking you to represent him legally," Marcus replied. "I am asking you to understand him. Tyler grew up hearing stories about what happened between us. He took the lesson of that story to heart. And now he is being destroyed for it." Maya leaned back in her chair, considering. She remembered Tyler vaguely from the news coverage after the Fort Braxton incident. He had been a teenager then, the general's grandson who had watched his grandfather's career end in scandal. Now he was a young officer whose own career was on the line. "Tell me more about what happened," she said finally. "Not the official version. Tell me everything." Marcus told her. He described the training exercise, a complex urban warfare simulation that was supposed